Hello and welcome to this webinar on DIY and lead-based paint, keeping ourselves safe from lead paint. This webinar is an initiative of the Wasteman's Residential Lead Working Group. The Wasteman's Residential Lead Working Group was formed in 2018 and includes representatives from the health and public health sectors, lead awareness advocates, environmental consultants, local government, and of course the paint retail and trade industries. The group is concerned with the undetermined magnitude of health effects from multiple residential, not occupational, sources of lead. Their purpose is to bring together people to identify and address gaps in the knowledge and the practice for the benefit of all New Zealanders. Firstly, some housekeeping. The webinar will be recorded, and if you are registered, you will have that available to you on offline after the webinar is completed. Please make sure if you can that you are on mute, and this should be automatically in place anyway. We have a busy schedule to get through, so can I please ask that you hold all questions until after all speakers have finished their presentations. If you need, you can add your questions to the Q&A function of this webinar, and they will be answered at the end of the webinar. Just to try and make things run efficiently, I will read out questions on your behalf and direct those to the presenter that we need to. If we run out of time, the presenters will be able to respond offline afterwards, and that will probably be through contact details that will be provided through the Lead Aware group. This webinar is for DIYers and landlords to help understand and identify the risks of lead-based paint and how to protect themselves, their children, pets and property while undertaking paint renovation and maintenance. We're privileged to have three guests today. Joanna Dowell from the EPA, Environmental Protection Authority, will be presenting on lead, the environment and health effects, including the different exposure routes. We'll then have this followed by Greg Percival from Resene Paints, who will be presenting on lead and paint then and now, including some legacy issues with lead and testing. And the final presentation will be by Phil Wilkinson from Master Painters New Zealand, presenting titled Lead, Paint and Advice for DIYers. So we've got quite a bit to get through today. I just firstly have a quick bio on each of our presenters. Firstly, Dr. Joanna Dowell is a senior advisor in the Hazardous Substances Reassessments team at the Environmental Protection Authority, where she's worked now for nearly 5 years. Joanna has recently led a project to update the rules for paints, reducing the allowable limits on lead impurities. Joanna has a PhD in chemistry, but please note she is not a medical doctor. Greg Percival from Resene has been employed previously and has been in the global paint industry for over 45 years now. 22 years with a company called Roman Haas Company, USA, working in over 20 countries and receiving an Otto Haas Award for Technical Excellence in 1997. The last 17 years, Greg has been employed by Resene Paints and has led the NZPMA, or the New Zealand Paint Manufacturers Association, since 2017. Greg became a member of the NZEPA Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Decision-Making Committee in 2020. Greg has lectured on paint technology at universities in New Zealand and Singapore, with core interests in modelling paint performance, properties and rheology. Reducing toxicity in paint ingredients and improving the safety of paint application has been a focus of Greg's career. Thirdly, Phil Wilkinson from Master Painters New Zealand. Phil is a very experienced painter and decorator with over 40 years industry experience and knowledge. Phil has previously owned and operated successful paint contracting businesses and for a number of years ran a successful paint retail business under the Benjamin Moore Colourworks brand. In 2006, he joined Dulux New Zealand as branch manager of the Dulux Trade Centre in the CBD of Auckland and became one of the two full-time Dulux Training Academy trainers in 2007, delivering Dulux product and paint industry training to trade and retail customers. In 2012, Phil moved to Master Painters New Zealand as their training and assessment manager, where he is currently the National Field Services Manager. In this role, he assesses potential members and provides workmanship inspections for both Master Painters New Zealand members and non-members alike, and delivers training courses to members and aligned industry partners. In the past few years, Phil has delivered numerous courses to painting and decorating industry apprenticeships, block courses at polytechs across New Zealand as a specialist trainer in dealing with and managing lead-based coatings. Phil sits on the Australia-New Zealand Standards Paint Industry Committee. This standard setting board provides industry knowledge and expertise to the Ministry of Business and Innovation and Employment in relation to national standards. Recently, this committee has updated ASNZS 2311-2017 Guide to Painting of Buildings and ASNZS 6361 Guide to Hazardous Paint Management. So with that out of the way, my name is Carl Myers. I work for a company called Alchemists Limited in Auckland. We are a paint manufacturer and a member of the NZPMA, the New Zealand Paint Manufacturer Association, which is the leading body in New Zealand representing manufacturers and suppliers of paint ingredients into the New Zealand market. So without further ado, I'll ask Joanna to start her presentation. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen and start my presentation. There it is. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I will start with a short introduction about the Environmental Protection Authority. We are New Zealand's environmental regulator, and we manage hazardous substances, including paints, by setting rules for their safe use. Our ultimate goal is to protect both people and the environment. So as Carl mentioned, I recently led a project to update the rules for paints, specifically to reduce the allowable lead impurity levels down to 90 parts per million, which is in line with other international regulators and the World Health Organization recommendation. We also strengthened the regulatory framework around lead in paints and set a new requirement for test results of lead in paint. So let's talk about lead. First, I have to give you some context. Lead is an element that is a normal part of the Earth's crust. The metal is easily obtainable from its ore, and it is easily workable, being soft and malleable. This has meant that it was widely used in a lot of ways, for example, in pipes and plumbing, and construction materials such as roofing. Being dense and heavy, it has been used for weights, such as fishing weights and weights for scales, as well as ammunition. It was used in stained glass windows, and when the printing press was invented, the movable type was made of a lead alloy. And my light's gone out. Oh, there it goes. In more recent times, lead has been used in solder, was used as a petrol additive, and is still used in lead acid batteries. And of course, it was widely used in paint. So pigments such as chrome yellow, which is lead chromate, red lead, which is lead oxide, and white lead, which is lead carbonate, have been used for centuries. These compounds not only give the paint its color, but also help the paint dry quickly and have anti-corrosive properties. Up until the 70s and 80s, they were widely used for painting houses, cars, and other industrial applications. Even the Auckland Harbour Bridge was once painted with lead paint. But, and here is the big but, while lead may have been highly useful, it is also very bad for all living organisms. Exposure to lead can cause a myriad of health problems. Exposure to very high levels of lead in a short time, which is called acute exposure, can severely damage the brain and central nervous system, causing coma, convulsions, and even death. Fortunately, such high levels of lead exposure are usually rare these days. But lead exposure can also cause anemia, high blood pressure, kidney damage, digestive problems, and toxicity to reproduction, such as reduced fertility or fetal abnormalities. Young children are particularly vulnerable to the effects of lead, as they may absorb up to 4 to 5 times as much lead as an adult from the same ingested dose. At lower levels and with long-term lead exposure, there may actually be no obvious symptoms, However, this chronic exposure can lead to a range of injuries across multiple body systems. In particular, lead can permanently affect children's growth and brain development, resulting in a reduced IQ, behavioral changes, including reduced attention span and increased antisocial behavior, and reduced educational attainment. So how can we be exposed to lead? There are three main exposure routes. Absorption through skin is one route, although relatively rare these days. Lead is absorbed through the skin depends on the type of lead compound in question. In the past, some cosmetics contained lead, but thankfully that is very much banned today. The second, beg your pardon. The second route is through inhalation. In the past, the main source of inhaled lead was from emissions from leaded petrol, which has also thankfully been banned. Today, the main risks for inhalation exposure are from welding and soldering with lead alloys and from dust during renovations of old houses painted with lead paints, which you'll hear more about from the other speakers. The third exposure route is through ingestion, and this is the primary exposure route for children, especially young babies and toddlers who show hand-to-mouth and object-to-mouth behaviors. This increases their risk of exposure to lead-contaminated dust, soil, and paint. Children who engage in pica, which is the compulsive habitual consumption of non-food items, are at particularly high risk. So lead exposure through ingestion can also occur through contaminated food and water. Once absorbed into the body, lead is distributed in three body systems: blood, soft tissue, and bone. The amount of lead in the blood is usually only 5 to 10% of the actual body lead burden. Organs such as the kidney, liver, and brain store about 20% of the lead, and this is where lead has the most toxic effects. The remainder of the lead retained by the body is stored in the bones. Lead does get eliminated from the body, mainly through urine. The half-life of lead, so this is the time required for the amount of lead to reduce by half. So the half-life of lead in the blood and soft tissue or organs is 30 to 40 days. However, the story is very different for bones. There, the half-life of lead is 30 years. So bones become a storage site for lead, and slow release of lead from bone can maintain chronically increased blood lead levels long after external exposure has ceased. Lead released into the environment is also toxic to plants, animals, and microorganisms, causing adverse effects in all the organisms that have been studied. Lead can affect biodiversity and can cause changes in community composition. Another example, it can kill microorganisms in the soil, slowing the decomposition of matter. Plant growth is affected by lead, and animals eating contaminated plants can also show toxic effects. Vertebrates can show neurological effects similar to humans. The main source of lead in the environment has been airborne lead, mainly from the use of leaded petrol, but also from waste incineration. Other sources are paint chips and dust from old leaded paint, pollution from industrial or manufacturing activities, and lead shot. Lead may have been, and sometimes may still be, a useful metal in some applications, but it is also highly toxic and has significant effects on people and the environment. The international consensus is that there is no safe level of lead exposure. So what is being done about lead? Well, with the ban of leaded petrol, it is the dust dust containing lead from paint, which remains the major source of lead exposure for people. That is why the Global Alliance to Eliminate Lead Paint was established by the United Nations Environment Programme in conjunction with the World Health Organization. So their goal is to encourage the development of laws that prohibit the import, manufacture, and sale of lead paint. Their recommended limit is 90 parts per million, which is a low but technically feasible limit to achieve. Nearly all of the countries that have enacted lead paint limits in recent years have used this limit, such as the US, Canada, Australia, and now New Zealand. Lead use has been and is being reviewed in many consumer products or uses, and regulators worldwide are working to ban or strictly limit it. In New Zealand, as I've mentioned, lead is banned in cosmetics and in petrol for cars. It is limited to 90 parts per million in toys. Lead shot was banned in 2023, and last year the EPA set very low levels for lead and other toxic element impurity levels in graphic materials for children. Most recently, the lead limit in plumbing materials is being lowered from 4.5% to 0.25%, which is effective from next year. All of these efforts are making a difference. Average blood lead levels measured in people worldwide are declining. So let's keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Joanna. We will now move on to Greg Percival from Resene Paints.
Thanks, Carl. Just share my screen. So, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar. Hopefully you can all see my presentation.
Yes.
It's entitled Lead and Paint Then and Now, and just a little bit about Resene Paints. We were started in New Zealand in 1957 and still a family-owned business out of Wellington, and we try to be the leading provider of paint in the New Zealand market, and safety and health and toxicity have always been very high on our concern levels for the paint industry. Just going on to my next slide. So just quickly about lead in the environment. So Joanna sort of covered some of these points as well. So it's naturally present in the Earth's crust, and globally it's in there at about 0.0014%, so or 14 parts per million. And in New Zealand soils, we're a bit newer, so it ranges from about 20 to 200 ppm. So it's around us all the time, and but at relatively low levels. It's quite rare, but it's more abundant than silver and gold. And historically, as you know, the world's developed and it's been here for millions and millions of years, the lead gets carried up through vents in the Earth's crust, and it gets concentrated. And right across different parts of the world, you find this mineral, and it comes up as lead sulfide, which is called galena, and lead carbonate, which is called cerussite, and it's across all continents, so right across Europe and in the UK, right through Asia, Africa, and even Australia, the big lead mines. So for thousands of years, humans have been creating art using these coloured minerals, such as the white lead, but also, you know, iron oxides, the browns and reds and yellows, even using blood for painting on cave walls and things like this. So it's been part of our environment for tens of thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians, Greeks and Romans all used white lead for art and cosmetics, and even though toxicity was really well known, even the Romans wrote about it 2,000 years ago, but it kept on being used, especially through Europe, as a cosmetic and in paints right up until the late 1800s. And toxicity of lead was starting to, as you know, quality of life but improved and our lifespans lengthened out. It was really found out that as you got older, lead could be a real problem, and you never got rid of it. So it was much better understood, and a viable alternative was found in titanium dioxide, which is probably the best white pigment that's been used today. The problem was back then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was very high cost and difficult to process. It wasn't easy like lead. Lead you can just throw into a wood fire, and then the carbon in the wood fire will give you molten lead at the bottom. So it was quite easy to make. So lead used in paint, it's relatively low cost and produced in many countries. And because it's been produced for centuries, there's industries set up all over the world for making lead pigments and lead products. So lead carbonate, which you can see on the top right of this slide, is very white, it's clean and bright, and has a very good hiding. So it's used a lot in the top coat of your paint. 80% of the paint that Resene sells in New Zealand is white or just off-white colours or creams, and the other 80% are your 20% are your darker colours. So whites are very important in human building and life. So differing lead oxides can be red, cream, and black. So this can be seen on this slide here. So you see an orangey colour, a yellowy cream, and a black colour. This photograph is actually from a sales brochure which is coming out of the country at the moment globally. That's still selling these products. Not New Zealand, Australia, or the US or Europe, of course. It's got good anti-corrosive and preservative properties. As you can imagine, there's not many life forms which can survive high levels of lead in the paint or on the paint surface. So it keeps the paint nice and clean and also stops it spoiling in the can. But of course now, in the last 50 years, there's been a lot of alternatives to that which are more effective. In automotive coatings, you'll see these chromates, very bright colours back in the 50s, 40s and 30s. And so bright oranges, bright yellows, and mixtures of those in between. So where can you actually find lead in paint? So New Zealand use levels peaked in the 1920s and 1930s, and white lead itself was banned in paint in 1965. But lead oxides continued into the 1980s, 1990s, and even the lead chromates were still used up until into the 2000s, quite late by some manufacturers. So in housing through the 1970s, you see whites and creams, and it was used in interior as well as exterior. So you've got to watch out for any older houses. That we see some of these pictures here from 1900s right through to 1970s. There could be still some lead in there. Especially on the interior of the paints, you've got white mouldings and white door frames and the doors themselves. And you see this cartoon brochure from the 1950s in the US. These walls don't just look good, they're yummy too. They actually flavoured paint, interior wall paint. For whatever reason, I don't know, they're selling, this was from a company which sold lead products and made them into paint. Actually, in my own background, we have a history of it as well. My wife, when she was much younger, 2 or 3 years old, got very ill and ended up in hospital with blood poisoning. And it took them a while to find out what was going on, but it turned out there was a kitchen table was painted white. It came out of Middlemore's paediatric unit for the childcare area, and it was coated in white paint. And that white paint was lead-based. And so her and her brother used to sit under the table. Mother caught them peeling the paint off and eating it. And the reason they do that is it's very sweet. Most lead salts and lead compounds taste very sweet, like sugar. So for very small kids, it's very easy to get some contamination. So if you see kids crawling around the floor and putting their hands in their mouth, they could be picking up a sweet taste from old lead dust. So vehicles, of course, you can see, you might see those bright yellow, bright orange colours, and they're used in primers as well for roofing and fences as bright red primers. So if you scraped away the surface of the paint, you might see a red or an orange or pink coloration that could have red lead. So just to talk about testing for lead in paint, I know Phil's going to talk a little bit more about this later on. So older houses may have many layers of paint. So lead is not likely in the top coat, but in the layers underneath. So our old house was from the 1920s, and when we stripped the paint back off the exterior boards, we counted 9 different colours. And so as you go down through the layers, as you got deeper and deeper, there's actually some lead in the very bottom coats, which hadn't been removed. So in those cases, it's best to get a professional in, talk to your paint professionals, and they can come in there and remove that paint. But if you want to test to see if you've got it, there's quite a few different testing systems out there in the marketplace. Originally, there was old sodium sulfide test, which is a smelly sort of a liquid, and it's a clear liquid, and you just drip that onto the paint and it turns black. And you can see a little bit of that in this coating here. So get yourself a magnifying glass and a sharp box cutter knife or a scalpel blade, and wear some good gloves to make sure you don't cut yourself. But as you go down through the layers, just test with a drop of the sodium sulfide, and it turns black, then it means that lead could be present, but it also does give some false positive. So it's always best to get a professional to check. Another system out there which we sell in our resin colour stores is the iQuip instant lead test. So it's like a pen-based system. So you break the pen and squeeze it, and it mixes the contents, and then within a few minutes you then dab it onto that lead surface, and you get a very bright colour change in terms of bright orange. There's other ones called safe home swab tests, and these are swabs that you put in there, and they start off as a pale orange colour, then it turns a dark purpley red colour if lead is present. So both tests are indicative only. If testing is positive, you really want to seek professional help for confirmation and advice. So once you get hold of that professional people, they'll come around with quite often with an XFR test. So this is X-ray fluorescent, and so it can actually detect lead as an element sitting on the surface and within the paint, and gives a very detailed report. So moving on to lead in paint now. So as Joanna mentioned, the United Nations have been promoting a limit of 90 ppm in paint, which effectively means it cannot be added as a raw material, but it may be present as a contaminant. And so as part of the paint manufacturers, when we looked at New Zealand bringing in the 90 ppm limit, we had to look around at all the different raw materials, and the only ones we really had to worry about for normal DIY use or for industrial use is the metallic zinc primers. So ones which got actual zinc metal in the primer itself. Lead can be quite a high level of contaminant in that zinc. So all our manufacturers now make sure that we find zinc with very low levels of lead impurities before we make that paint. So way below the 90 ppm nowadays. But unfortunately, not all countries have legislation limiting lead in their paint. So probably about 1/3 of the world actually does have legislation, and so you really have to look at the paint origin or the origin of the country from that paint. So if you're purchasing or specifying that paint, so just have to make sure that what you're looking at is coming from a country which is covered by legislation. So New Zealand has adopted the 90 ppm limit. It was before this period at 1000 ppm or 0.1%, as has Australia. So the bulk of New Zealand paint supply is compliant. Pretty sure most of the paint in New Zealand gets used quite quickly, especially in the DIY and decorative space. But if you're looking at paint cans, it might be sitting on your shelf at home, or it could be at that 1000 ppm level or less, or if you had some really old stuff in your grandparents' garage or shed or something like that, it may actually have higher levels of lead in there if it was from the 1950s or 60s. So it's best, if you worry about that, get those paint products into a colour shop, resin colour shop, or into Mitre 10s, and they return the paint back and get it recycled and handled correctly. The New Zealand Paint Manufacturers Association has surveyed its members, manufacturers and suppliers to New Zealand, and they can confirm there's no imports or usage of lead that we're aware of. So that's the end of my few slides that I had. I've got some other resources here, but thanks for listening in. So the story of lead, which is Joanna's story on the EPA website. We've got waste bins, we're talking about our group here. We've got Health New Zealand and talking about lead there. We've also got Phil Wilkinson's Master Painters website. So you can go and have a look at those links and you'll be able to get much more information. So thanks very much for listening to me. Hand it back to you, Carl.
Thank you, Greg. Just a reminder to all that if you do have any questions, pop them in the Q&A, and we will attend to those after the last presentation by Phil. So Phil Wilkinson from the Master Painters New Zealand will present our third presentation. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Carl. Greg, you'll have to stop sharing your presentation. It won't allow me to share mine while yours is open. Thank you. I hope you can see that. I'm unable to share it in full screen mode for some reason.
Down
But
the
anyway,
bottom there, Phil, you might see your little little presentation icon down on the bottom right there.
Thanks, Carl. It does help when I push the buttons in the right order, doesn't it?
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hand it over to you, Phil.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl, and welcome everybody. Thanks for allowing me to come and speak to you all. As we've already previous speakers have stated, lead's been common in New Zealand right up until the 80s, and potentially we were still using some of these products in the 1990s as painters held on to onto paint because they were their preferred products. The last one I remember using that was likely to be lead was calcium plumbate, which was a galvanized iron primer, and we were using that right up until the late 1980s and possibly the early 1990s. So our general rule of thumb is that if your homes that were built before 1970, I think it can be safely assumed that they contain lead-based paint. So how have we dealt with this over the last 40 or 50 years? Well, our strategy has been very simple. We've literally just covered up all these old lead-based paints with new painting systems. Back in the 70s and 80s, it would have been oil-based paint. And then from the 1990s onwards, we would have just covered everything up with acrylic paint. And it's been a really good strategy to dealing with lead on these older buildings. If we're not playing with the lead or coming into contact with the lead, it's much safer. So this strategy of just covering everything up has been a great one. But now we're seeing it as a bit of a failing strategy, as we're seeing blistering of the coatings when these new acrylic coats are painted over the painted substrates, especially on exteriors. And it's generally from the movement of these new acrylic paints, literally lifting the poorly adhered oil-based paint from the surface. So this great strategy we've had, we're now seeing some issues with. And generally we've considered lead to be, or painting over the lead to be a good method of taking away the nastiness of it. I've delivered this presentation a lot, and I always wanted to find out how many properties there were in New Zealand that had lead-based paint on them. And this is the only statistic I can find, and it's from 1984. In 1984, Brands thought there was 251,000 properties in New Zealand that had lead-based paint on them, and that each year approximately 5,000 properties undergo work to remove paint containing lead pigments. So that's 5,000 opportunities for us to be playing with that lead-based paint again that is on those surfaces. That 5,000 properties, probably half of them would be done by trade painters, but potentially the other half is done by the DIY community. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep, sorry, I've got technical difficulty here. So lead is dangerous. You do play at your own risk when you're playing with these and working with these old lead pigments. So our advice is always to let the professionals come in when you're dealing with lead. Anywhere we've got badly deteriorating paint or poorly performing decorating surfaces, we've got a risk. And generally those who are most at risk are children and animals. I'm old enough to remember that when we first had kids, my parents' generation, that cohort of people were telling us not to buy a second-hand cot when our first child came along, because those old cots could have been painted with lead-based paint. And as Greg's already mentioned, lead has a sweet taste, so kids were likely to chew those cots. They put those other lead-based objects in their mouths, they get that sweet taste. As we know, animals will lick their lead-infested paws all day long. They'll walk through the debris, pick up lead dust on their coats, and then consume that dust. In fact, some years ago, I took a dog to the vet who clearly wasn't well, and it was on the vet's radar. He asked me whether I was doing any DIY at home. So both kids and animals can consume the paint chips, the dust, or in some instances, even contaminated soil. So what do we do if we've got lead present on your home? Generally, our view is that if you can continue to paint over the lead, let's continue to do that. Removing the lead coatings is likely to cause more problems than leaving it in place. So generally, we've got the two options. Let's continue to paint this with some non-hazardous coatings, acrylic paint, water-based enamels. They will be fantastic products to use. But if it's a danger to health, or it's in a position where we have to remove it, mainly because it's failing those paint coatings and we have to remove them, then you'll need to then strip that lead and repaint the surfaces. So just very briefly, Greg's touched on this already. How do we identify lead-based paint? Well, there's several ways. Sodium sulfide is still very commonly used in the trade to identify lead-based paint. It is an indicative test only, and it is prone to false negative reads. When you're using these tests, it's never enough just to do the one sample. Our advice is to do 4 or 5 samples around the home, and you can be testing any painted surface, whether it be a weatherboard, a window frame, a soffit. But go looking for where the lead-based paint might be hiding. Remember, it might have been 40 years plus since we last put lead-based paint on those surfaces, and in some instances, those surfaces may have already been stripped and the lead dealt with. So if you do 4 or 5 sample tests around the home, it'll give us a good idea of what is lead. So Greg's already explained that what we do is we cut a notch into the paint coating using a box cutter knife, and we basically just drop of the solution onto the cut. If it's a positive result, then the cut will turn black or a very dark brown color. That will then show that lead has been seen on the surface. If lead is not detected, then it will just look like a clear liquid, and it will just sit as a clear liquid until it evaporates. This stuff does smell like rotten eggs. It does have a strong smell. Where do you buy it from? Well, you can buy this stuff online. You can buy it from some paint stores and places where painting contractors will purchase their products through. I've noticed that our friends at WorkSafe are using lead test swabs. I'm not sure if it's actually these particular ones that I've got the photograph of here, but these are the ones that I use for testing for lead on training courses I run. I do purchase these online. You wet the swab with water. That's asked you to shake off any excess liquid, and you'll get a slight color change in the color of the swab. When that color change happens after about 30 seconds, just rub the surface of the painted surface you wish to paint, and you should see a color change, and those colors will turn to be a pinky violety type of red color. That will show that lead is present. If you don't get a color change, then lead is not detected. And perhaps my preferred method for these instant tests is the iQuip test. Again, they're very easy to use. They're disposable. You get an instant result. The thing I like about these, the cartridges don't expire. So these are really handy for painting contractors just to carry them in their vehicles. If they're asked to test for lead, they can go and grab one. And these also change colour. They'll turn to a red colour if lead is detected, and there will be no colour change if lead is not detected. So if we're going to go do some work, we need you to wear some PPE gear. So we need you to wear a good quality, properly fitted toxic dust filter respirator when you're sanding, making dust, or scraping off these old lead-based coatings. Now, I've always said to painters that we don't want you wearing these types of masks. If you're doing a very small job in the DIY position, then I'm talking about perhaps removing paint off a windowsill or a door frame, then perhaps one of these 3M type of masks with the P2 filter on the front would be suitable. It would need to have the double head straps, but for a larger type of work, and certainly for painting contractors, even in the DIY space, if you were going to be removing a reasonable amount of these coatings, then a mask that looks more like this one would be better. We want to see a mask that's got filters that can be changed, and those filters changed regularly. So please replace those filters as often as the manufacturer says that you should do. You should look after your mask, and you should keep it clean and store it properly. So follow the instructions on the mask. Overalls, we would like to see everybody be wearing overalls, whether they be disposable overalls or the cloth style overalls. The overalls need to come down to the wrist, down to the ankles, and close at the throat, just like in the picture here. My preference is for disposable overalls because they have the spraying hood on them and they can come up over your head, and it keeps the dust away from your hair and stops you running your hands through your hair and getting dust onto your hands. And it's just another vector for lead to enter the body. Disposable overalls, while they can be a little bit more expensive because you're using multiple pairs than cloth overalls, I do think they are the way to go. We say to people, please don't wear your contaminated overalls and boots home. If you're doing work in the DIY space, take your overalls off outside of the house. If you're working outside, keep them away from your family. They don't want to be put at risk by the dust that are on your overalls. Boots and gloves, certainly in the contracting position for WorkSafe and for general safety, we would certainly recommend work boots to protect yourselves. Gloves when removing lead could be something as simple as these nitrile gloves shown here, or if you're using a chemical stripper, then maybe chemically resistant gloves such as these ones. We'd certainly be encourage you to clean your boots at the end of each day. I think wet wipes are a fantastic thing to use. They're relatively cheap and disposable. Dispose of the gloves at the end of each day. You don't want any of this dust going into your vehicles or going home with you. Clean all your equipment at the end of each day. Vacuum the surfaces that you've prepared. Wash, wipe, clean your boots with wet wipes or a damp cloth at the end of each day. And of course, let's replace those filters and those masks as often as the manufacturer recommends. One of the big problems we have is the hand-to-mouth contact. So the lead gets onto your hands, you pick up your cigarette, your vape, or whatever else you're putting in your mouth. That is a vector to be poisoned. So please, if you are a smoker or a vapor, that hand-to-mouth contact does cause problems. So perhaps no smoking or vaping while you're in the work area. Wash your hands before eating, drinking, or smoking. These are simple things that we can do to reduce the risk. Let's get our contaminated overalls into polythene bags, anything that's contaminated with the lead, and dispose of them. So how often should you dispose of, oh, no, let me rephrase that. Non-disposable overalls, they're not going to be changed as frequently as the disposable ones, which we say to painting contractors, you're probably going to need 2 or 3 pairs. You are going to have to change them relatively regularly throughout the week. You need to wash them separately from all other clothing. Those overalls should be kept separately and stored separately from other clothes. And please don't stand in front of your washing machine and give them a good shake before you put them in the washing machine. All that does is contaminate your laundry. Disposable overalls are safe, they're simple to use, and it would be our preferred method than cloth overalls. So if you're going to do some work inside, our advice is to remove all soft furnishings, including carpets and curtains where practicable. Furnishings that can't be removed easily, then you're going to have to cover everything up with polythene sheeting. This is so that we don't get any dust into any of these surfaces or fabrics. If you can get the furniture out of the room, that makes life a heck of a lot easier. If not, everything will just need to be covered with plastic. Lifting carpets can be difficult and not practicable. So those sticky plastic that you can put onto carpets is used very regularly in the building industry now, and we see this used multiple times for lead work inside. Food and medicines, these are things that easily can be overlooked, and we're talking about the easy things to overlook, such as lolly jars, fruit bowls, anything that can be easily overlooked. Pill packets at the side of people's beds and on bench tops. You see those sorts of things, just put them into a drawer, into a cupboard, and let's remove them. Let's get our plastic down. We just need to make sure that none of this dust is likely to get into any of the soft furnishings. And I suppose as a minimum, polythene is a great requirement, or just let's remove those soft furnishings completely. Let's keep removing that accumulated dust as often as necessary. We want you to use a vacuum cleaner with a HEPA filter. The HEPA filter will capture 99% of all the dust. We would strongly advise you not to use your home vacuum cleaner for this. Even if you have to go and purchase a vacuum cleaner, that is just solely for the use of the lead work. Otherwise, you run the risk of extending that contamination through the rest of your home. Let's wipe the prepared surfaces with a damp cloth or a wet wipe, paying careful attention to things like shelving, windowsills, anywhere where the dust could have settled. And then just make sure we dispose of the cloth along with the paint debris safely. I'm not sure how you can clean contaminated soft furnishings. I normally tell apprentices that we're probably relying on our 0800, what's your insurance company number at that point. What do we do with all the debris? Well, we need to contain the debris, we need to collect it, and then we need to arrange for disposal of this debris. Where do we take it to? Master Painter's opinion is that it really needs to go to a toxic waste dump. So our advice is to ring your local council or your local district council and ask for what are the rules in your area. In Auckland here, we're told by the council that small quantities can be wrapped securely and placed in the household waste, but our advice is that really all of it should go to a council controlled landfill so that they can deal with it properly. After all, lead is a toxic poison. For the old school, we have to tell them they aren't going to pull the stumps they used to do. We aren't going to burn the debris. We aren't going to bury it on site. we are going to take it to a toxic waste dump and get rid of it. Please don't shake your overalls or your covers or ground sheets outside onto the grass. All that does is contaminate the surrounding area. Please dispose of all of those things to the council controlled landfill. So before any work takes place, some things to consider. We just need to make sure that the occupants of the home that we're working in aren't going to be exposed to the hazard in any way, especially children and pets. In some instances, it may be necessary to vacate the house while we do this work, especially if you've got children there. Whatever we do, I suppose we just got to keep the kids and pets away from the areas where we're going to be working. We don't want them eating the debris, or for the pets to be walking through that debris and getting that debris on their coats. But I think it would be prudent, even in the DIY space, for you to be putting up some sort of signage to say that I am doing some dangerous work here. It could be something as simple as cones and tape, so that people can see there's actually a designated working area. In the commercial space, guys are probably putting up temporary fencing and more permanent signage. But in generally small jobs where there's not a lot of foot traffic, we generally see tape and cones and waratahs being used just to designate those working areas and keep people out of them. Probably a contractor would more likely be using a sign like this than perhaps in the DIY space. But if you can purchase these signs while you're working with them, it does keep your neighbours off the property or away from your working area when you're working outside. We've always said barricade the work area to prevent unauthorised access, so that people know that this is a space they shouldn't be coming into. Generally unauthorised access is anybody who is not wearing the PPE gear and has got tool in hand and doing the work. So if other family members are around, if they haven't got the PPE gear on, they should not be in your designated work area. Now, I've got a photograph here. There's some good things going on in my photograph as far as lead work goes, and there's some terrible things happening here as well. So the first thing I look at is the signage, and this is probably simple signage, but this is probably all that is required in the DIY space. You can see the waratah into the ground, and then the caution tape around the designated work area. The next thing I notice is the plastic. We would like you to have to use plastic. It should really be connected to the bottom weatherboard. It should then go to the ground, and at Master Painters we say it should extend a reasonable distance from the foot of the house. That reasonable distance, it needs to be enough to capture the debris should you lose control of it. So we want you to be using systems that capture all of the debris before it hits the ground. The plastic really is only there if you lose control of it. Kāinga Ora, when we deliver this course for their contractors, their definition of a reasonable distance is 4.5 metres. That means it's quite a considerable piece of plastic that you're using. So the painters here are using the plastic. I think they're doing a good job with the plastic. What I'm not very happy about is all the debris that's left on the plastic. You can see to the left-hand side of the picture all that loose and lightweight debris. That's all likely to be lead-based paint shavings, looking at the age of the house. Of course, there's all those trip and fall hazards as well on that plastic. We would have expected that plastic to be clean. Your job is to capture all of the debris before it hits the plastic. The plastic is only there as a secondary containment measure. Generally, we look at that bush in the centre of the picture and we think, well, perhaps that should have been covered with the plastic as well. I'm not sure how you clean that bush if you lose control of the dust and debris. So that the windows, please make sure the windows are closed if you're working outside. We don't want any of that dust and debris that you could be generating going back into the house. If you have to have the windows open so that you can work on those surfaces, then you'll need to mask out the windows with plastic and masking tape from inside. The next thing I look at is the PPE gear, and you can see a good example on the left of a guy who's wearing the full overalls, his head's covered, he's got gloves on. Those black bands around his head have got to be a mask of some description. So I think he's doing pretty well. The guy in the centre, not so well. So let's get that plastic down. Remember, the plastic needs to be large enough to contain all the debris that gets generated. That's good photograph here. The plastic is connected to the bottom weatherboard over the footpath, over the garden, and over the fence. We want you to use plastic. Plastic sheeting. We don't want you to be using painter's drop cloths. The plastic is one-time use, so generally best practice would be not to reuse the plastic. Put the plastic down. Once that side of the house is prepared, then dispose of that plastic and use fresh plastic. The reason why we don't want you to use painter's drop cloths, generally nobody cleans them. So there's a good chance of cross-contamination from your site to another site, especially in the trade arena. So those nice canvas drop cloths that Resene sell, fantastic for painting, but perhaps not for lead work. So work in a way that minimises all the dust and fumes from your work area. Avoid working on a windy day. If you're working on a windy day or you're working in a draft, you've got to be able to control that debris. So maybe having the home wrapped or working behind tarpaulins, as in the picture here. Just remember those tarpaulins will now be contaminated, so they'll have to be disposed of as well. We've talked about making sure you wear the right mask. So please, if you're going to go and purchase a mask, you need to have one that is suitable for what you're going to do. So if you're going to be creating dust, clearly you need a mask that copes with dust. If you're using solvents and chemical paint strippers, you need a mask that copes with those fumes. There's plenty of education around that you can get on masks online. Our advice is go and see a specialist if you're purchasing a mask. Tell them what you're doing. They'll be able to help you. Let's keep removing that debris that you're creating as often as necessary. We're saying here you should be doing it on a daily basis. I just think that you should be doing it all the time. We cannot allow that dust to go to places we don't want it to be. So use your vacuum cleaner with your HEPA filter, and please, just a reminder, it's not good practice to use your household vacuum cleaner. Perhaps if you're going to do a bit of this work, invest in a separate vacuum cleaner. Vacuum cleaners that operate in wet and dry conditions are going to be a good option as well. After vacuuming, there's still going to be traces of dust left behind, and in that dust is likely to be lead. So you'll need to wipe down those surfaces with a damp cloth or a wet wipe, and just make sure you dispose of those cloths or wet wipes afterwards. So I was going to very quickly, in the few minutes I've got left, just to run through some of our preferred and non-preferred paint removal methods. So a preferred method would be any wet hand or machine sanding of the surface. Generally, by having the surface wet, it makes dust inhalation much more difficult. So wet hand sanding and scraping would be a preferred method. Chemical stripping is probably one of the more common methods, especially in the trade arena, for removing these old coatings. There are water-based ones, there are solvent-based ones, and one of my preferred ones, there are several systems where you apply the chemical stripper and apply paper over the chemical stripper, allow it to dry, and then remove the paper. The paint coatings are then stuck to the paper along with the chemical stripper. It becomes much more safer to use. An example of a chemical stripper. Some of these ones can be, like this one, can be quite toxic. They've got very strong vapors and they can burn your skin when they come into contact with skin. Low temperature heat processes. There's several methods. This is an infrared system. Generally, when I think of a low temperature system, I think of a hot air gun. And my understanding is that the fumes created by these low temperature systems aren't as toxic as naked flame or open-ended torches that we used to use in previous years. Power sanding with a vacuum cleaner attachment. So as this photograph is showing here, the painter is sanding the surface and the dust is going through the tool and into a vacuum cleaner and capturing the dust. We'd still want you to be wearing PPE gear while you're using any of these systems, because it's still possible to lose control, be exposed to the dust or debris. Some methods to stay away from: dry sanding and scraping, not a good idea at all, and we would certainly recommend that you stayed away from these systems. Again, you can inhale or swallow the debris. So dry sanding or scraping, certainly not preferred. Water blasting, please don't remove coatings with a water blaster. We see lots of damage done to both the substrates, and you contaminate the surrounding areas with the lead chips of paint. So water blasting, yes, to clean the surface, not a term I like for cleaning. Low pressure washing would be a preferable term. Water blasting to remove the coatings is definitely something we don't want you to do. So doing what this gentleman's doing here, I think he's put his paint stripper onto the garage door and now he's removing all of it, the paint and the paint stripper, with the water blaster. If there was a drain just out of camera shot there, all of that debris and toxicity is going down the drains. So please stay away from that method. Torch or open flame method. This is what painters used to use in years gone by, and perhaps not so far away, long ago. These gas operated torches. Naked flame did come out of the end of these torches. Lots of fumes, which are particularly toxic, and of course very dangerous. You can burn houses down with these sorts of tools. So please, no open or torch burning off. Abrasive blasting, well, generally this wouldn't be done in the DIY arena, but removing lead-based paint with an abrasive blaster would be extremely dangerous. So any form of paint removal where there's an abrasive blasting where lead's concerned, please, would be a method we'd want you to stay away from. If this all gets too hard and you have to call in the experts, then we would suggest a member of Master Painters. All our members are experienced and qualified painting contractors. On our website, masterpainters.co.nz, you can see our membership, and we'd be asking you just to check to make sure that those painting contractors are lead certified and experienced in stripping these coatings. Some painters work in small niches within our industry. Not all painters cover all parts of the industry, so look for somebody who specialises in removing these coatings. You can only become a member of Master Painters after peer review, so somebody will have gone out and investigated this company, looked into them to make sure that they deliver work of a high quality. All members must adhere to the MPA Code of Conduct and Code of Practice. All our members carry public liability insurance should something go wrong. They only use quality materials. And for residential repaint work, there is a 5-year guarantee that's available to consumers through Master Painters. There are terms and conditions, and if you go to our website, masterpainters.co.nz, you can see what those conditions are. If you want to contact us, well, the website's a great place to go to. The 0800 Paint NZ number will take you through to our office in Wellington. And if anybody wants to contact me direct, there's my email address on the screen there as well. And our 5-year guarantee is held by Master Painters and not by the painting contractor who's done the work. And I think that's me, Greg. Sorry, that's me, Carl.
Thank you, Phil. It was great. We're just about out of time, and I can see that we've had some questions and some answers posted on the Q&A, and I think everything there has been answered. So if there is further questions, they can be answered, and a point of contact will be made after the end of this webinar. Just a reminder that the webinar has been recorded, and that recording will also be available afterwards, probably within the next 24 hours for you to review if you require. If there's not any other questions,
I'd like to
got one.
mention something.
Sorry, Ananda. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ananda from Lead Aware New Zealand, and I just wanted to touch on something that Phil mentioned, but I'm not sure if it was very clear about people removing paint using heat guns. I think a lot of people in the DIY groups on Facebook mention using heat guns for removing paint as being and something that is good to do, but I think there's a difference between high temperature heat guns and low temperature heat guns. I don't know if Phil might want to talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, the higher the temperature, the more toxic the fumes will be, is my understanding. And some hot air guns can go up to 600 and 700 degrees, and they will probably be quite toxic to use. That would not be my personal preferred method. I would be chemical stripping or sanding with a vacuum attachment would be preferable in my personal view to heat of any description.
If there's not any other questions, there's one thing I want to mention, which is it's important for people doing DIY to recognize that the very, very small amount of lead in dust is incredibly toxic to children. And all of these practices you mentioned are fantastic at reducing that. But just so people know, the amount of lead that can be dangerous to a child is the weight of a mosquito spread evenly across a bedroom. It's such a small amount that it can be very dangerous for children who are crawling around and getting that on their hands and putting it in their mouths. So it's really good to just be very methodical and careful about how you're doing this, as Phil has described in these methods, which has been amazing. And just also wanted to say thank you so much to Phil and Greg and Joanna. You guys have given such an awesome presentation today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ananda.
Yes, thank you to the presenters, Joanna, Greg, and Phil. Like I said, the recording will be available after the webinar is complete, and there will be some contact details for further questions if you have any, especially for the people who have potentially not listened live today, but are taking the recording and may have some questions afterwards. So appreciate all of your time today.